I'm Robert Summercrass, Dean of the Terry College of Business, and I want to welcome you to Terry Third Thursday here at our Terry Executive Education Center. If this is your first time coming to a Terry Third Thursday event, then also welcome to the Terry Executive Education Center. The TEAC, as we call it, is our outpost here in Atlanta where we do programs with alumni, executive education. It's a really good base for us of operations. We couldn't bring Terry Third Thursday to you without the support of our sponsors. And I want to recognize, first of all, Bank of North Georgia for their sponsorship of this event. They're our corporate sponsor. And if I could get you to stand and let's recognize Bank of North Georgia. We also have two media sponsors, Public Broadcasting Atlanta and Atlanta Business Chronicle. I think we've got a couple reps there. Thank you very much for that. Let me say a word about upcoming programs. We've got two more scheduled for the rest of calendar year 2009. In October, on the 15th, Tim Chapman will be our guest. He's co-founder and CEO of Stadion Money Management in Watkinsville. And the title of his talk is An Entrepreneur's Spirit, Don't Always Listen to What They Say. In November, Howard McClure, president of CVS Caremark Pharmacy Service, will be with us, and he'll be talking about employee benefits and specifically how you can maximize the value of prescription and drug benefits for your employees. We take December off, as always, for the holiday break, and then we'll be back in January, and we have some events already lined up for 2010. Now, the Terry College has a number of executive education programs, and we're adding to that list, but I wanted to mention one of our longest-running and best-established executive education programs. Each year, we host a conference here in Atlanta called the Bond-Bright Energy and Natural Gas Conference. And this year is our 29th edition of this, scheduled to begin just 3 weeks from today at the Intercontinental Hotel down on Peachtree. Al Danielson is with us. Al's the person who can best answer your questions. If you've got questions about that conference, I think it fits in well with our program today. Switching from energy to alumni, I want to remind you that we have our annual homecoming tailgate coming up for friends and alumni of the Terry College. We'll be hosting it on November 7th, and it's going to be on the lawn in front of Brooks Hall in Athens. 3 hours before kickoff, we'll get started before the game against Tennessee Tech. So I hope you can come and join us for some food and some drink and some good times before everyone watches the Bulldogs play. You can register for the tailgate on our alumni website, or we've got Jennifer and Lisa with us somewhere. Anyway, you can talk to them about registering as well. I guess Lisa's outside not hearing me. With that, I want to turn things over to James Sheppard, who is going to introduce our speaker. James is the chairman and co-founder of the Sheppard Center, which is one of the most amazing and life-altering medical facilities in our country, and it's right here in Atlanta. We're proud to call James one of the alumni of the Terry College. In 2003, in fact, we awarded him with our Distinguished Alumni Award. His community involvement runs very deep, and his service includes being a member of our alumni board. He's here this morning to introduce his friend and neighbor, David Ratcliffe. James, thank you for being with us.
Robert, thank you for the introduction. It's a privilege to be up at Terry and serve on the alumni board. And really have enjoyed it. And this is my 6th year, and I think we need to link because I believe that the alumni are energy, and it's been a great experience. So, it's my privilege to introduce David Ratcliffe. David's a neighbor of mine, and I've known him for a long time, a native of Tifton, Georgia. He received his bachelor's degree in biology from Valdosta State University. And he received a law degree from Woodrow Wilson Law in 1975, a member of the Georgia Bar, but I think he's a reformed attorney. He's married to the former Cecilia Chandler of Adel, Georgia. They have 2 grown children, Andrew and Elizabeth. And I'm not going to read through what David's really done at Georgia Power from when he joined in 1971. Has continued to move up and up and up. Until now, he holds the CEO and chairmanship at the Southern Company. And until he held that position, he was one of the 3 neighbors on the street that cut his own grass on Fridays before he went out. So he served on numerous boards and is committed to the community. I think his position at the Southern Company provides a giant platform to take leadership of large issues that affect local, state, and regional issues. And David's leadership is based on his integrity, his strong faith values, and integrity. He and Cecilia host a Bible study in their home and work with young couples on marriage. I think 2 of the most telling things are some quotes I'm going to read from 2 of his senior managers. Tom Fanning, who's the chief operating officer of the Southern Company, says, "One of the lasting foundations for the way Southern Company approaches its business is to be a citizen wherever we serve. The community should be better off because we're there. As the CEO of America's largest electricity producer, David embodies that approach in his leadership style. He's promoted a balanced, common-sense approach to running Southern Company, putting the welfare of customers in the center of everything we do. Beyond that, David exhibits an unrelenting concern for the welfare of employees, holding all employees accountable for an outstanding corporate culture." Then the ones that get a little more personal than that come from Alan Martin, an executive vice president, and CEO of Southern Company Services. He says, "I invited David to Birmingham to speak to my group of managers from around the state. During the Q&A, someone in the group asked him, 'Why would you come all the way over here just to talk with us with your busy schedule, turn around and head back home?' His answer was, 'Y'all invited me.'" And the really personal comment was from Alan as well. "My mom and dad have been having some serious health issues over the last year or so, and during that time I received numerous early morning emails saying, 'Just wanted you to know, I'm spending a few quiet moments praying for you and your mom and dad.' This comes from a guy with the weight of the world on his shoulders. Makes me want to run through a brick wall for him." Without going on any further, I'm going to turn the podium over to David.
Thank you very much for that very kind introduction. I want to share just a brief story with you about the opportunities I've had. First of all, it's been an unbelievable opportunity for me to be in this position, coming from Tifton, Georgia. As James said, I grew up with School of Valdosta State. My dad was a University of Georgia graduate. He graduated Phi Beta Kappa from University of Georgia, worked his way through college, graduated with a master's degree in plant physiology. My brother and I were not quite as good as students as he was, and he was a very smart person and always challenged us to do well, but I think he was a bit surprised at how well we were able to do in our respective careers. In fact, I'll tell you, through the opportunities to advance in management, one of those was the opportunity to become the president of Georgia Power Company. And I never will forget when I called my dad on a Sunday night. My mother had passed away earlier, and he was by himself in his early 80s. And we grew up in Tifton, and we had a next-door neighbor who worked for Georgia Power, like most of you who saw that presence of Georgia Power in the form of the line crew. He was a foreman on the line crew, so we knew Georgia Power. He knew it was a great company. I called him, and I said, "Dad, I got some great news." He said, "What's that, son?" I said, "If nothing happens, on Wednesday when the Georgia Power Company board meets, they're going to let me be the president and CEO of the company." Well, there was this moment of silence on the other end of the line, and he said, "God almighty, son, that's an important job. Do they know what they're doing?" Well, I'm not sure they did, but I told him I thought I'd take them up on the opportunity, and it's been a lot of fun. It's a privilege for me to have the opportunity to spend a little bit of time with you this morning and talk about my business. I'm going to take most of my time and just sort of give you a perspective of the industry and what we as Southern Company are doing in the industry and some of the challenges we face. And then I want to take just a moment on the very back end and talk about the issue of leadership, corporate leadership in this economy and this society these days. So I'm going to take a huge risk. Hey, look at that. I didn't think I ought to take for granted your knowledge and understanding of Southern Company. Some of you know Georgia Power and Alabama Power. Southern Company is a holding company. That's how the stock's traded. We call ourselves a super regional electric utility company, energy company, primarily electricity for us. 42,000 megawatts of capacity, $17 billion of revenue, $1.7 billion in net income, $48 billion of assets. Our core service territory consists of about 120,000 square miles in 4 southeastern states with right at 4.5 million customers, and depending on where the stock's trading from day to day, somewhere around $28 billion of market cap. This is a map of our service territory, and I want to make sure you understand we call ourselves a super regional electric utility because we consider our marketplace really the southeast. The red represents our retail business that you know most likely, as I said, as Georgia Power, Alabama, Mississippi Power, which serves the southeastern corner and the Gulf Coast of Mississippi, and then Gulf Power Company, which is the panhandle of Florida. We also serve in various ways the surrounding territory through our wholesale business. We actually have some assets in Carolina, and we sell to our neighbors and we buy from our neighbors. So there's a retail part of our business and there's a pretty big wholesale part of our business. About 80% of our net income is a function of that retail business. I thought it would be helpful if you understood a little bit about how we make electricity in this country today. And this is not Southern Company, this is the entire nation. If you look at this slide, you see that about 50% of the electricity we produce comes from coal-fired generation. We'll talk more about that as we go forward. 20% of it is natural gas, 20% of it is nuclear, a little bit of hydro. You see that renewable slice up there, non-hydro renewables. We consider hydro a renewable resource also, but non-hydro renewables, that would be the wind and solar and biomass and things like that. About 3%, larger than it has been and growing, but still a very small portion of how we make electricity. And you see fuel oil there. And the comment I want you to understand, we talk a lot in this country from time to time, particularly in Washington, about energy independence. We get mixed up in that debate, in my judgment, inappropriately. We don't burn much oil, either bunker C, number 6, or number 2 diesel fuel to make electricity. Energy independence doesn't have much to do with the electric utility industry. It has a lot to do with the transportation industry. And that's how you get into the question of energy independence. I gave a talk several months ago, and I was quoted as saying something awful. And what I said was we should abandon the notion of energy independence, because I think it is something that we will not achieve. Rather, we should focus on a smarter and more strategic energy interdependence. We should recognize that we don't control all of the resources. We ought to develop all the resources we have, but we ought to recognize that the world has the energy resources in a lot of different forms. We're smart to create strategic partnerships and be smartly interdependent and strategically interdependent. But I wanted you to understand fundamentally how we make electricity in this country. And if you looked at Southern Company in the southeast, and you'd see this would be, except for the Florida utilities, pretty much the case. Most of us make electricity by burning coal. In the Southern Company, it's about 60 to 65% of the generation is from coal. So it's a huge part of our energy mix. Now, I don't have to tell you folks, some of you have painfully been through this last year, very tangibly, to know that the last year has created a bit of a recalibration, if you will, about the future needs for energy. But if you look at past recessionary periods of time, what happens is when we come out of the recession, the demand for energy moves pretty quickly. What I've tried to do here is to give you some sense of what the future portends for our industry in terms of electricity needs and demands. And we can argue about when the curve turns up. I'm like most of you, the sooner the better would be great, but I suspect that it'll be a little bit slower than it has been in the past. But one thing is for certain. We know that electricity drives the economy. We continue to plug in things and create devices that use electricity. And that's not a bad thing. A lot of people think that's awful. Well, it really isn't, because in many cases, the application of an electro technology is a more efficient use of energy than an alternative. So we're in favor of you plugging in more things as long as they are efficient and it's a good use of energy, and we'd like to see you deploy more electro technologies. If you do that, and as you do that, and really as the economy begins to recover and expand, we will need more electricity. In some estimates, and you see here from sometime in 2010 time frame to the 2030, in the next 20 years, we will need about 20 to 30% more than we have now. That's a huge, huge need for this nation. You see the Southeast, but you see it's pretty 10 to 20% more is going to be a major challenge for us as an industry. You need to understand that our industry is, we argue between us and I think the rail industry about which industry is the most capital intensive. The fact of the matter is we require a tremendous amount of capital to operate and to expand our business. We're one of the most capital intensive in the entire economy. As we look at how we will produce whatever amount of new capacity we need, and as we think about changing out the existing capacity, these are the options that are generally commercially available to us today. Now, I put this up here simply to give you a perspective of this conversation about how we should make electricity, because I think it's a much better conversation when you have some sense of the economics of this conversation. If you look, I've lined up here from the least expensive, and I didn't put hydro on here. Obviously, hydro would be the least expensive because you're depending on rainfall, which hopefully is free, and we're in a lot better shape this year than we have been in prior years. But when you look at the other forms of energy, you begin with coal as being the cheapest available to us today. You move to natural gas. Let me take just a moment on natural gas, because the industry that I'm a part of for the last 20 years has built almost nothing but natural gas. Some renewables in the form of wind and solar, but primarily natural gas capacity in the last 20 years. So we built a lot more natural gas capacity. We will consume a lot more natural gas. In fact, Southern Company's projections are that within probably the next 10 years, we will actually burn more natural gas than Atlanta Gas Light distributes now as a distribution company. So we will have a huge impact in the marketplace. Now, people argue, well, we found much more supply of natural gas than we have in a lot of different forms, whether it's shale supplies. It's a function of how much it costs to recover the natural gas and what the market price is. We've seen the price of natural gas in the last year move from $12 a million BTU to less than $3 a million BTU today. At $3 a million BTU, it is an outstanding fuel for us. It has a much better footprint than coal from an environmental standpoint. At $12 a million or $13 or $14 a million, it isn't a very good choice. It is one of the choices available to us. Nuclear power, as you know, we've made a commitment to expand our nuclear capability. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment, in the form of 2 new units at our plant in Vogel here in the state of Georgia. Biomass is something that we're also investing in. And then you have the wind and the solar. And let me give you just a nickel's worth on wind and solar. The fundamental reality is that the wind velocities in the southeastern part of the United States do not come close to what they do in the desert southwest and in the west. It isn't that I don't like windmills. The wind doesn't blow. It's real simple. Now, we've worked with Georgia Tech to study offshore wind resources, and we're continuing to do meteorological work out there to see if it makes sense to install offshore wind capacity. And we also are continuing to look at the potential for application of solar resources both in territory and outside of the territory. But again, the best application of these technologies is not in our footprint. Now, there are people who argue that, well, we ought to just build all the windmills and the solar facilities out west, and we ought to hook a big extension cord to it and move it to Atlanta, to southeast Chicago. And you can do some of that. No question that we can move electricity over transmission lines for great distances. But the physics of that is the further you move it, the more inefficient it is because of line losses. Is the technology getting better? Absolutely. I'm a technology optimist. I believe we will continue to find ways to improve the efficiency we have and are. Talk a little bit about that in a moment in terms of the smart grid, but we are investing large sums of money in this process. And the thing that, let me get over here and make sure I'm capturing all my notes. The thing I want you to understand from an industry standpoint, I talked about the capital-intensive nature of this business. And I'm talking about generation here. This is how we make electricity. And there's 2 other major components. We make it, then we transmit it over the big transmission lines, and then we distribute it in the neighborhood over distribution lines. If you look at the investment contemplated over the next 20 years, that chart I showed you to meet the demand for new capacity and change out existing technology, we're looking at the need as an industry for $500 billion for generation. We're also looking on the transmission and distribution side for another $800 to $900 billion of capital. Now, I remember a couple of years ago when I would make the statement that we needed $500 billion, and there would be some oohs and ahs in the crowd. Today, you've gotten so jaded with trillions of dollars, it doesn't even register on you anymore. But let me just tell you, the easy monthly payments on that are going to be tough. Your electricity bill is going up. It's going to go up. We're not in a decreasing cost business. Now, the last time we had this kind of need for new capacity in our industry was in the early 70s. And remember, some of you are old enough, and I see some gray hair in the audience, and you remember that we were going strong with significant expansion in the economy. We had growth 7, 8, 9% a year, and we were trying to build power plants and put them online as fast as we could. Then we had the Arab oil embargo and the economy following that, which absolutely depressed demand and flattened it, and we all who were in the midst of construction programs tried desperately to either get out of them, if that made sense, or finish them. And the good news for us as Southern Company is we finished a good bit of what we had under construction, and that has served us well for the 20 to 30 years since that period of time. But when we did that before as an industry, when we did it before, if you looked at the credit ratings of the industry, the financial integrity measurement of the industry, strength of the balance sheets, if you looked in the 1970s, 90% of this industry, 90% of the investor-owned utility industry was single A or better in terms of a credit rating, 90%. When you look at today's strength, you can almost turn it upside down. It's exactly the opposite. There are two companies in the investor-owned utility space that are single A credit rated, Southern Company and Florida Power and Light. And from there it goes down into the triple Bs, double Bs, and on down. So we are entering a phase of extraordinary capital need and expansion in a weakened financial situation. And I don't have to share with you the reality of this economy and the availability of capital and the cost of capital that has significantly changed in the last 18 months. It will be a huge challenge for us to raise the capital, to deploy the capital, and to finish the construction programs that we have begun. So now let me move to a topic that I'm compelled to speak just a little bit about, because the major issue that we face as an industry and to some degree as a nation with regard to energy supply is the question of climate change and what should we and will we do as a nation about CO2. And I want to give you just a little bit of perspective about what we're discussing and its potential impact on us, because this issue has so much to do with what technologies we choose, based that I showed you on those earlier slides. And I want to give you some sense of the issue, and then what are the options that are available to us to try to match our desire to do something about CO2 and greenhouse gases with our ability to continue to provide reliable and affordable electricity for our customer base and hopefully an expanding economy. This is an interesting chart because it simply says that when you look at the total amount of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, this is what's out there today. About 3% of that is CO2. 3% of the greenhouse gases is CO2. 3%. This is a much more interesting slide to me. This slide represents how much greenhouse gases, how much CO2 is emitted or produced on an annual basis. This is how much goes into the atmosphere. And you see that little sliver down there, that little piece of this pie. First of all, 96% of this is, the annual production of CO2 is from non-fossil fuel sources. Well, everybody says, gosh, what? That can't be. I showed this slide, or at least I talked this slide through Southern Governors Association about a month ago. And I saw them doing a little bit of double take because it's hard. Well, it's got to be a much bigger component. The fine print would indicate to you that most of the production of CO2 is from non-fossil fuel combustion. It's from things like forest fires and volcanoes and decaying matter in forest and other sources. So when you get down over here to the side, to that little sliver, and you consider the U.S. electricity sector, you see that out of the total annual production of CO2, we represent less than 1%. Now, you've got to keep that in perspective, because remember, when we talk about this issue, we do not talk about Georgia climate change. We don't talk about U.S. climate change. We talk about a global climate reality. This is not only a U.S. issue. So what we do must be factored and at least balanced with some sense of, is the world going to deal with this issue? Because what we do in the U.S. electricity sector around this issue, in my judgment, will have very little to do with this reality of what gets put into the atmosphere every day. Now, I could talk longer than you want to listen about more about this and the science of all of this. I'm not going to do that. I want you to understand, as the policy debate continues in Washington, I want you to have some perspective of this. And, you know, I keep asking my corporate communications people to draw the South Georgia version of this chart, which would have a dog, maybe even a bulldog on it, and it would have the CO2 numbers on it, and on the tip of the tail, I guess it wouldn't be a Georgia bulldog because it doesn't have much of a tail, but the tip of the tail of the dog in the old saying that we use, we literally are trying to wag the dog with the tail here, maybe even the tip of the tail. And I don't mind trying, but I want to make sure that everybody who is in this discussion understands the consequences of the decisions that we are making. And the consequence will be significant cost to our society as we try to deploy either more expensive technology or controlled existing technology at a higher level. It simply is going to cost more money. The numbers I quoted to you earlier do not contemplate a CO2 control regime that's being discussed in the Congress today. So I just wanted you to have a bit of a perspective about this issue. Now, we have an organization in our industry called the Electric Power Research Institute. That's the EPRI at the top of this. And for the last 2 years, EPRI has been doing a lot of good, solid research around this issue. And what we asked them to do was to assume that we wanted, we wanted to make significant reductions in the next 20 years in CO2 emissions and to reduce the footprint. Assume that money is not an object. Just look at the available technology and the ability to deploy that technology to try to reduce our carbon footprint as an industry. What can we do and what technology is available to us? And what you see here, let me tell you what those words. First of all, at the very top of this slide on the right-hand side, we know that we can and will do a great deal more with regard to efficiency and conservation. A lot of technology evolving that will allow us to inform you better about your usage. Hopefully, when you're better informed and you understand different price signals, you will make better decisions about when to do certain things and reduce your consumption. We also know that we can do things to help you simply conserve. Better insulation, all kinds of things that we are doing and will continue to do more of, particularly as costs go up. It makes more sense to deploy more efficiency and conservation. We will do and are doing more renewables. We'll do more wind and more solar as a nation, and we'll do biomass. We're doing, I'll talk in a minute, we got a project to do biomass. We are on the forefront of expanding the technology available to us in the nuclear industry. We also believe strongly that we cannot and should not abandon coal as a viable choice. Remember, 50% of the electricity comes from coal. Coal represents the most abundant domestic source of energy we have. Probably some controversy with the new discoveries of natural gas about whether it's the most abundant. It certainly is the most economical. My view is we shouldn't abandon it. We should continue to use it cleaner, and if required, we should control the CO2. I believe we can. I said earlier, I'm a technology optimist. We've done it with SO2 and with NOx, and we're doing it with mercury and particulate matter. We can deploy new technology, but we shouldn't abandon the most abundant domestic resource we have. PEV stands for plug-in hybrid electric vehicles. We know that if we can get the battery technology moving forward at a more rapid pace in the automotive industry, that the electric hybrid vehicle is probably the best answer for the transportation needs for us as consumers, not the heavy-duty equipment, but us as normal vehicles, if you will. The plug-in hybrid electric vehicle has tremendous opportunity. You're seeing every automotive industry player in the sector working on an electric battery and delivering an electric vehicle. The biggest player probably will be General Motors next year with their Volt vehicle. We've run tests. We've driven electric vehicles. We continue to run tests, and the technology continues to get better. It's simply a matter of the battery technology. That's all it is. And as soon as it gets to the point where you will buy it at a price point that you can afford and the reliability is such, I think it's going to be a fantastic solution. And then the last thing there you see is Electro Technologies, and that goes to the notion that I talked about earlier, where we know that in some cases when you install an electro technology, you actually decrease emissions, even if the electricity is produced with different kinds of sources. So net is a reduction. The key to this slide is that there is not a singular technology that we can decide as a nation will, quote, solve our problems when it comes to climate change. If we decide as a nation we want to reduce the CO2 footprint and carbon footprint of this industry, the fact of the matter is we must use every single technology that is available to us. Now, the current technology debate in the Congress passed a bill in the House earlier this year. It's on the agenda in the Senate. I suspect that if you read what's going on, I suspect there's very little likelihood that they will get to it this year with all of the debate and all of the conversation about health care. Probably won't get to it until the first quarter of next year, and that'll be a function of the politics. But the current aspiration of the policymakers is to reduce the CO2 footprint, not just this 30% here, but 80% by 2050. That's 80% reduction by 2050. The estimates are that, and you can find all kinds of different numbers about this, but anywhere from probably 15% to 50% increase in the price of electricity, depending on what we do, how fast we have to do it, and what's actually required in the final legislation. It is likely that even if the Congress does not deal with this in the Senate this year, that EPA will move forward to regulate CO2 as opposed to the Congress legislating policy about CO2. We've said as an industry and as a company, we'd be better served with the Congress legislating policy and then let the regulatory process have a framework against which to respond. And that's what we've been working on. We get accused a lot of being against any kind of climate legislation. Well, we're clearly on record as being in favor of good public policy that is informed about cost and about technology and sets reasonable targets and timetables and provides consumer protection from runaway prices associated with CO2. I think we can do all of that. But as you watch the debate continue, you will see that there are people on both ends. There are people on some ends say we shouldn't do any of this. And remember, there are people who say, why in the world would we do this as a nation if China and India are not going to do this? It's a good question. People on the other end who say we should lead the world. We are leaders. We should lead in technology. We ought to get on with this. There's something that we have to do to protect and try to preserve the quality of life that we enjoy. Like most emotional and complex debates, I suspect the best policy is somewhere in the middle. And what we've tried to support is that kind of policy outcome that balances our desire to achieve something over a long period of time that also allows us to develop and deploy the technology that will be required to do this. And this is a huge undertaking. It has all kinds of assumptions. That nuclear slice that you see right there is a major, major deployment of new capital. Well, this is my summary slide about that diagram. And it goes back to what I said earlier. I don't have the luxury of deciding that I'm only going to do one thing. What I am doing, and I think we're a pretty good representation of the industry, is we're literally working across this entire framework of our business. You hear a lot of conversation these days about this idea of a smart grid, and I've said many times, I'm really in favor of a smart grid. Who in the world would want a dumb grid? I mean, that makes no sense whatsoever. So I want mine to be as smart as anybody else's. The good news is that it is a smart grid as we change out analog technology and deploy digital switching and digital controls and monitoring. It gets smarter and smarter and smarter. We're deploying automated metering infrastructure. Let me show you. I'll just go to this slide because I want you to understand a little more specifically what we are doing. First of all, on the efficiency side, we can demonstrate to you that with the programs that we have in effect right now, there's about 3,100 megawatts of capacity. That represents about 3 nuclear plants that do not exist and we don't need because we've reduced the demand on our system through conservation and efficiency. We'll get another 1,100 megawatts over the next decade. We'll spend $1 billion over the next decade to get all of that. But that's the right thing for us to do because it's cost effective for us to do it. We know the best thing for us to do is to avoid generating a kilowatt of electricity if we can get the same financial benefit from not doing it. That's the key here. Renewables, we've got a multitude of research and development projects around wind and solar and biomass. I told you earlier we're actually converting a coal plant in South Georgia down around Albany from coal to biomass. We're going to consume wood waste in the vicinity. It'll be about 100 megawatts of capacity. Small plant in the overall scheme of that 42,000 megawatts. But at 100 megawatts, it'll be one of the largest in the country, one of the largest biomass plants in the country. That's the technology that we think we can deploy in some other older facilities. I told you that we believe and continue to provide significant leadership in the area of coal technology development. We recently were designated by the Department of Energy as the National Carbon Capture Research Center. We have a facility where we do a tremendous amount of research over in Alabama and have for years, and it will be the place where we decide how to do the carbon capture. We also have to worry about storage of CO2 once we capture it. It doesn't just disappear. You got to do something with it once you capture it. IGCC, I won't go into except to tell you that it is state-of-the-art coal gasification technology. We think that's where the technology ought to go. In nuclear, I said earlier that we made a decision in Georgia to move forward with Vogtle 3 and 4 because we think that is outstanding technology, and we think the nation and obviously we think our company needs to invest in that technology. We're well underway. We've got an early site permit from the NRC. We're the first in the country to get an early site permit. As we succeed, we will be the first to build new nuclear in 30 years in this country. It's great technology. It's gotten better, more efficient. It's gotten safer, more safeguards. It's the right thing for us to do. It's an expensive proposition, though. I think it's important that we do it and we do it well because I think it will provide a bit of a bow wave for folks who will come behind us to deploy the nuclear technology that we showed you earlier by the electric power research must be deployed if we're going to succeed in achieving our objectives to reduce carbon. Now, let me summarize all this with 2 or 3 key points from an industry standpoint to say, I said earlier, we require a tremendous amount of capital. If you look at Southern Company's 3-year capital budget, it's about $16 billion, 3 years. $16 billion, that's a lot of money. My dad would be scared to death if he knew I was trying to oversee something like that. And we're just one of the players. We're a big one, but it's a lot of money. Rates are going to have to go up. We don't have the luxury of choosing a particular technology. We're going to have to do a little bit of everything. we're going to have to work as hard as we can to get a good policy outcome, a balanced policy outcome. And I want you to understand we're trying to do that with our presence in Washington. Not everybody appreciates the fact that we're there and we work hard to try to make sure that we don't go to either end of the spectrum, because I think the right policy is somewhere in a balanced in the middle. But I want to assure you that we are focused in everything we do on trying to make sure that you as a customer have a reliable and affordable supply of electricity. And that's our primary driver. That's what we're all about. So rest assured that we're paying attention. We're working hard in technology and in policy. And the good news is that those of us who have to go to Washington and work on things like policy are not encumbering those people who are out there on the ground every day keeping the lights on by setting poles and stringing wire and operating power plants. They do a fantastic job. I told you I wanted to spend just a moment off of the industry and talk just a little bit about what I believe is a crisis of credibility in corporate America these days. I don't have to tell you that with what's going on the last couple of, well, really probably since Enron in our industry, I believe that there has been a significant challenge in us as corporate leaders to maintain the credibility and the integrity in this industry. Everybody has a value proposition. We have one we call Southern Style. It's something that one of my predecessors began back in the mid-90s. We've changed it a little bit, but it's real simple. Unquestionable trust, superior performance, and total commitment. And those are the things that drive us as a company. Everybody's got a value statement. Every one of you who work in any kind of corporate reality would have something that would look very similar to that. The key is not the value statement. Obviously, you have to have one, but the key is the accountability for modeling the behavior. And that's the hard part. We've seen significant failures in corporate leadership because people don't want to be accountable to each other and to anybody for modeling the behavior. It's much easier to hang it on the wall and talk about what others ought to do than it is to be accountable ourselves. Well, I submit that if the accountability doesn't begin with me, then there isn't any accountability. If I'm not willing to be accountable for modeling the behavior, then we don't have anything to stand for. So the expectation that I have of my folks is that it begin with me and go through the entire organization. And then there have to be consequences. When people do things that are not right, there have to be consequences. We can't just, I talk about flags and hugs. And the concept is I want everybody in the organization comfortable that they can throw a flag on anybody else anytime they need to. And they ought to be particularly comfortable on throwing a flag on me. As a leader of the organization, you have to challenge me if you see me doing something wrong. Not only is it okay, or not only is it expected that you will challenge me, but if you don't challenge, this is the culture I want to get. If you don't challenge, you're going to be in trouble. In other words, if you see it and pass it and don't call it out, then you're going to be in trouble for not challenging. I love a phrase that I saw in an ethics book, a little training program years ago, that little short phrase that said, react to smells. It's a great phrase, react to smells. Don't walk past something. Challenge. If you think you smell smoke, stop and investigate and challenge. So I want people who throw flags on me. And when they throw a flag, my responsibility as a leader is to hug them and tell them how much I appreciate the fact that they care enough about the company, they care enough about me as a leader to throw a flag. If we don't create that kind of corporate accountability and that kind of culture, then we're going to continue to have these failures in leadership, and the failures cost every single one of us. Anybody in any kind of position gets painted with that big brush. We're all a bunch of crooks, we're all a bunch of no goods, and we all rob and steal and cheat. Well, we don't, but a few of us have. and it has cost all of us. So I'd challenge us, beginning with the mirror test, to rise to the standard of reestablishing the credibility in terms of leadership in corporate America that I think I think our employees want to work for, and I think our customers want to do business with. So I'd love to keep talking with you, but I think I'm about out of my time. Any burning questions? Robert, do we have time for any questions?
Yeah, we've got time for a few questions. Let me just ask that before you begin asking a question, that you raise your hand and you get a microphone. We are recording this Terry Third Thursday for our
you didn't
podcast.
Tell me that.
Now you know. So anyway, please get a microphone. It's also very crowded in here, and if you ask a question without a microphone, people on the other side of the room are not going to hear you. So any questions? Leave it to you.
Is it on?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you so much for your talk. Aside from trying to bring wind power from the west to the east, what makes solar and wind power so expensive?
It's a great question. First of all, what we're looking for in terms of a resource is something that we have to do a life cycle cost on. For example, let's say I need 100 megawatts of capacity. Then I'm going to try to find 100 megawatts that will operate for 60 years on as high of capability factor as I can. So what I'm trying to do is to evaluate the economics of how long will it run and how much will it run during the day. And when you look at solar and wind, if you think about it, the wind does not blow round the clock in very few places. The sun obviously doesn't shine at night. So these are intermittent resources. So when I'm looking at 100 megawatts of a solar capacity versus 100 megawatts of a nuclear plant, my nuclear plant runs 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. My solar plant goes up and down. So the economics of those two on a life cycle cost make the nuclear much cheaper because it's more dependable and operates 24/7. Now, the key to that, the key to helping renewable energy like wind and solar is to find a way to store the energy when it does run. Because a lot of times you get wind velocity at night. Well, we don't particularly need a lot of capacity at night because the load goes down at night. But if we could store it at night and then use it the next day, well, that goes to battery technology, which again is getting better. So it's the intermittent supply and nature of wind and solar that make them much more expensive. Yes, sir.
You talked about smart grid back in the spring. Florida Power and Light and the city of Miami launched this huge smart grid initiative. I wanted to get your thoughts on what you think about the smart grid and that initiative, and then do you see Georgia Power and the city of Atlanta following in their footsteps?
That's a great question. Thank you. There's a lot of conversation under this umbrella of this smart grid, and I talked just briefly about it. Most of the time when people are talking about smart grid, they're either talking about transmission, the big lines to move the wind and solar from west to east, or they're talking about smart metering, automated metering. We're in the midst of a process as a company. We've got about 1.5 million automated meters already installed. We're moving to the entire customer base being on automated metering over the next 2 or 3 years. It's about a $400 or $500 million project, but it will allow us to, obviously, to take meter readers off of the street, trucks off the street. So we're deploying, just like Florida Power and Light, we're deploying the technology. What it will do is it will allow us to send, basically we're taking the electromechanical device off the side of your house that's a meter, and we're plugging in a computer. It's interesting. Culturally, we had to make it look like a meter. Seriously. we couldn't put a computer on there because you wouldn't think you had a meter. So, and not everybody trusts us, but we made it look like a meter and we stick it on there. It's fine. And what it does is it allows us to access the information, but it also allows us, as the technology gets better, to communicate with you and to send you information about how much electricity you're using. Most important, it will allow us to tell you that if you use it from 11 o'clock in the morning till 4 o'clock in the afternoon, you're on peak, and it's going to cost you 30% more, as opposed to if you can use it at 7 o'clock at night to 6 o'clock in the morning, we'll give you a discount. So hopefully, as we give you more information, you will use electricity much more efficiently. But now you've got to make that choice. My vision is that we will come to you and talk to you about how you want your home managed, and we will work with software suppliers, whether it's Google or IBM or Microsoft. They will sell the program into that technology, and then we'll sell you a package that says, if you'll tell us how you want your home managed, we'll manage it for you. I'm a little concerned about telling you how you ought to run your home. See, we've tried that. We know we've run multiple experiments where if you'll give us control over your air conditioner, direct load control, we can send a signal and shut off your air conditioner. But there are a lot of folks that don't like that. Maybe they don't trust us, but they don't like us having control. And as we deploy this electro technology, the smart grid capability, we become more vulnerable to cyber issues, to access by people who don't want to do good things, and we've got to work through all that. We're working through all that. So, long answer to say, all of us are trying to move forward with the deployment of smarter technologies like that. So we're doing the same thing.
Okay, we've got time for just one more question.
This might be a little off subject, but the ethanol, it seemed like as soon as we started implementing that, the cost of food just skyrocketed. And I know that's not really in your realm, but I don't think it is. I don't know.
Well, it's a great example of good intentions not thoroughly thought through and the consequences not fully understood. And it created, as you said, huge increases in the price of corn, unintended consequence unless you're a corn farmer, but the price of food goes up. Well, that's what I'm trying to make sure as we debate climate policy. We understand that if you require this reduction in this time frame, as opposed to lengthening the requirement. For example, if you say we've got to reduce CO2 emissions by 30% by 2020, then immediately you have foreclosed a lot of the technology options that might be available 20, 30 years down the road. And the unintended consequence will be that I will shut down existing capacity, and I will buy natural gas capacity because that's the only thing available to, or build more nuclear. Well, there's a limit to how much of that you can do, and there's significant unintended consequences to bad policy. Another good example is everybody's in favor of wind and solar. Well, now you're beginning to see, if you read, there's some pushback on wind and solar because it has an impact. There is not, I'm sad to tell you, that there's not a way to make electricity that doesn't have an impact. It has an impact. And it's a matter of trying to balance the impact between environmental desires with affordability and reliability, and that makes it complex and frustrating. But again, we just need to do a real good job. I think the best advice to us is that old carpenter's adage, we ought to measure twice and cut once. Thank you all very much. Thank you, Robert.
David, on behalf of the alumni and the Terry College, I want to present this sculpture from local artist David Benzunas to you.
Great.
It's a remembrance. Thank you very much. And to everyone here today, remember, as you're leaving the parking deck, just say you were at Terry Third Thursday, and they'll let you out of here. Hope you see you next month.